Chapter 1 today được viết theo đúng format. Realistic emotional storytelling. Cinematic pacing. Câu ngắn, dài xen kẽ, có quan điểm cá nhân, có chi tiết thật như đời thực. Hook giữ người xem lâu, thiên về emotional neglect hơn melodrama. There's a sound I still can't tolerate at 34 years old. A spoon hitting the inside of a ceramic bowl. Not loudly, just that soft little clink. Most people would never notice it. But every time I hear it, something inside my body tightens before my brain even catches up. Because that sound takes me back to a kitchen in Mesa, Arizona. Winter of 2003. 6:42 in the morning. My mother standing at the counter eating cereal alone before work, while the rest of us stayed quiet enough to pretend we weren't awake yet. I think people underestimate how much children notice when a family is slowly falling apart. Not the dramatic moments, not the screaming, the silence. That's what stays. The careful silence. The exhausted silence. The silence where everybody in the house starts moving around each other like coworkers trapped on the same night shift. My name is Leah Mercer, and for most of my childhood, I was what adults like to call the easy kid. Which sounds nice until you realize easy children usually become invisible adults. I didn't get into trouble. I didn't ask for expensive things. I learned very early how to sense tension before it exploded. From my experience, children raised inside unstable homes develop emotional radar frighteningly fast. You learn footsteps, door sounds, breathing patterns, the difference between a cabinet being closed and slammed. You learn survival before multiplication tables. My father, Eric Mercer, sold HVAC equipment across Arizona for years before the housing market collapse hit him hard around late 2008. My mother, Dana, worked front desk at a dental office near Gilbert Road. She was the kind of woman who looked functional from far away. Hair done, bills mostly paid, smiled at church, remembered birthdays on Facebook. But inside the house, exhaustion had started eating pieces of her long before anybody admitted it out loud. And I don't say that with hatred anymore. That took years. I used to think pain automatically made someone cruel. Now I think unresolved fear makes people emotionally dangerous in quieter ways. Especially parents. Especially parents who never learned how to deal with shame. At first, the changes were small. My younger brother Mason still got hugs before school. My older sister Claire still got help with college applications. Me? I got responsibility. Leah can handle it. That sentence followed me through almost every stage of my life. At 12, I was packing my own lunches while my mother drove Claire to debate competitions in Scottsdale. At 13, I was waking Mason up for school because my father had started sleeping on the couch most nights after drinking. At 14, I learned how to stretch canned soup for 3 people because nobody had grocery money until Friday. And somehow, none of those moments felt abusive enough to complain about. I think that's why emotional neglect confuses people deeply. There's rarely one giant moment you can point at. It's accumulation. 1,000 tiny disappearances. One Tuesday in March 2009, I stayed 2 hours late at Fremont Junior High because nobody came to pick me up after theater practice. I remember the exact date because it was the same day dust storms rolled through the East Valley and turned the sky orange before sunset. Mrs. Elena Baird, my drama teacher, sat with me on the auditorium steps until 7:13 p.m. while calling both my parents over and over. Nobody answered. Eventually, she bought me vending machine crackers and asked softly, "Do you know another adult we can call?" And I remember pretending to think about it, because admitting there wasn't anyone felt worse than being forgotten. That's the strange thing about neglected kids. We become loyal to the people hurting us, not because they earned it, because children would rather blame themselves than accept their parents are emotionally absent. My father finally arrived close to 8. No apology. Just tired eyes and the smell of beer hidden badly under peppermint gum. On the drive home, he sighed and said, "You're old enough to understand people are stressed, Leah." I stared out the passenger window the entire ride. I think that was the first night I understood something fundamental. There are adults who see children as people, and adults who see children as additional pressure. The difference changes a life. At home, my mother barely looked up from the kitchen table when we walked in. Stacks of overdue notices covered half the surface beside an untouched cup of coffee. Claire was upstairs talking to friends online. Mason was asleep on the couch. And there I was, standing in the middle of the room, feeling ridiculous for having needed somebody to remember me. Nobody yelled? Honestly, sometimes I think that made it lonelier. People imagine damaged childhoods as chaos, but some of the deepest wounds happen in extremely ordinary kitchens, under fluorescent lights, while somebody reheats leftovers, while nobody notices the quiet kid getting quieter. Years later, our team would mentor teenagers aging out of unstable homes through a community culinary program in San Diego. And one thing Team Chungtoy noticed again and again was this: the children who suffered emotional neglect rarely described themselves as abused. They described themselves as not important enough. That difference matters, because one creates pain, the other creates identity. Back then, though, I had no language for any of it. I only knew two things. I worked very hard not to become a burden, and every year my family seemed relieved by how little space I took up. Then came the night that changed everything. October 18th, 2010, 10:26 p.m. The night I accidentally overheard my mother say something I don't think she ever imagined I would survive hearing. Something that split my life cleanly into before and after. I didn't mean to overhear them. That part matters to me, because even now, years later, I still don't like the idea of invading people's private moments. I think children who grow up around emotional instability become overly respectful of other people's boundaries while nobody protects theirs. That night, I had gotten up for water. Nothing dramatic, just insomnia again. By 15, I had already developed the habit of sleeping lightly. Every sound in the house felt important: the garage door opening late, my father pacing, cabinets closing too hard, the sharp silence after arguments that never officially happened. I walked halfway down the hallway when I heard my mother crying. Not loud crying, the exhausted kind, the kind people do when they think nobody can hear them anymore. Their bedroom door was cracked open maybe 3 inches. Warm yellow light spilled across the carpet, and then I heard my name. Not Claire's, not Mason's. Mine. My father sounded tired, older than I remembered. "We can't keep doing this with Leah," he said. I froze. There are moments in life where your body understands something before your mind does. That was one of them. My mother whispered, "She tries so hard, Eric." And for one stupid second, I thought they were finally going to say they noticed me, that maybe all those years of shrinking myself had mattered somehow. Then my father sighed. "You know what I mean," he said. "She's too sensitive. Everything affects her. The other two are easier." Easier. It's amazing how one ordinary word can rearrange a person internally. I stood there barefoot in the hallway, trying to understand how being emotionally affected by neglect had somehow become evidence that I was the difficult one. From my experience, emotionally neglected children often become mirrors for family dysfunction. The child who reacts becomes the problem. The people causing the pain become stressed. That dynamic destroys people quietly. My mother said something then that I would replay in my head for almost 20 years. She just needs to learn how to be more independent. Independent. I almost laughed hearing it, because by 15, I already cooked dinners 3 nights a week. I filled out school forms myself. I reminded my father about Mason's dentist appointments. I knew how to keep conversations short when adults were drinking. But apparently independence, in our house, really meant stop needing emotional care. I backed away from the hallway before they could see me. My chest hurt. Not dramatically, not movie scene heartbreak. It felt smaller than that, like something quietly folding inward. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed staring at my math homework for almost an hour without reading a single word. Then, around midnight, Claire knocked softly on my door. She was 18 then, already halfway out of the family emotionally even before she left physically. She looked at me for maybe 5 seconds before asking, "What happened?" I think siblings know each other's survival faces, especially in homes where everybody learns to hide differently. I told her I overheard Mom and Dad talking. She sat beside me without interrupting while I explained. And when I finally repeated the word easier, Claire closed her eyes like she was angry at herself for not protecting me better. Then she said something I still think about constantly. "Leah, people don't only neglect the child they love least. Sometimes they neglect the child they think will survive it." At the time, I hated hearing that. Now, I think there was truth inside it, not an excuse. Never that, but truth. Because families under pressure often start organizing themselves around functionality instead of emotional fairness. The loud child gets attention. The struggling child gets attention. The successful child gets investment. And the quiet, capable child slowly disappears into utility. A month later, on November 22nd, 2010, my guidance counselor, Mrs. Naomi Feldman, stopped me after third period at Mesa Ridge High. She held a manila folder against her chest and asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes, immediately. Of course I did. Children trained to minimize themselves answer automatically. But then she asked something unexpected. Leah, when was the last time somebody asked how you were doing and waited for the real answer? I couldn't respond. Not because I didn't know, because I realized I genuinely couldn't remember. That terrified me more than the question itself. Mrs. Feldman ended up letting me sit in her office during lunch twice a week after that. No therapy speeches. No dramatic interventions. Just quiet consistency. Granola bars in the bottom drawer. A couch that smelled faintly like peppermint tea. Somewhere I didn't feel emotionally in the way. I believe people underestimate how life-changing safe adults can be. Not perfect adults. Just emotionally safe ones. Years later, when Chungtoy started building mentorship programs for vulnerable teenagers, Team Chungtoy had one rule above everything else: consistency before advice. Because damaged kids do not trust wisdom first. They trust patterns. Back then, though, I still thought survival meant becoming smaller, quieter, lower maintenance, more useful. I thought if I became easy enough, maybe one day somebody would finally choose me without feeling tired first. I had no idea how dangerous that belief would become once I entered adulthood. Chapter 3: The Girl Who Never Asked for Anything. After that night in the hallway, something inside me changed permanently. Not loudly. That's the part people misunderstand about emotional damage. The deepest shifts rarely happen during explosions. They happen quietly, internally, like a door locking from the inside. I stopped expecting comfort after that. Not immediately. Habits like hope take time to die. But little by little, I began editing myself down into smaller and smaller pieces. Smaller reactions, smaller needs, smaller dreams. I became extremely good at being low maintenance, and adults rewarded me for it constantly. That's the dangerous part. I think society praises survival behaviors in children without realizing how tragic those behaviors actually are. People called me mature, responsible, independent, easygoing. Nobody asked why a 15-year-old girl seemed emotionally prepared to disappear at any moment. By junior year, I had developed routines so precise they almost looked peaceful from the outside. Wake up at 5:18 a.m. Shower before everyone else used the hot water. Pack Mason's lunch while checking chemistry notes. Leave the house early enough to avoid breakfast conversations entirely. I spent more time at school than home whenever possible. The library became my version of safety, not because it was joyful, because it was predictable. Mrs. Helen Navarro, the librarian, started noticing me around February 2011. She wore oversized cardigans even in warm weather and kept peppermints in a glass jar beside the checkout desk. One afternoon, she looked up while stamping a return slip and said, "You always sit in the same corner for exactly 3 hours." I shrugged. She smiled gently. That usually means somebody is hiding from something. What scared me most was how quickly tears burned behind my eyes after she said that. Not because the comment was cruel, because it was accurate. From my experience, emotionally neglected people often become overwhelmed by ordinary kindness. Your nervous system gets so used to emotional scarcity that simple attentiveness feels intimate. Mrs. Navarro never pushed me to talk. That mattered. She simply started setting aside books she thought I'd like: memoirs, business biographies, cookbooks, psychology essays written for teenagers trying to understand unstable homes. One of them changed my life: a worn paperback written by a family therapist named Dr. Alan Richter. Inside was a sentence I copied into my notebook on April 9th, 2011. Children who feel emotionally unsafe often confuse being needed with being loved. I stared at that line for almost an hour, because suddenly my entire personality made horrifying sense. I wasn't trying to be good, I was trying to justify my existence. That realization cracked something open in me. slowly at first, then all at once. Around the same time, my father's drinking got worse, still functional, still deniable, which honestly describes a shocking number of family problems. People imagine addiction as chaos and police sirens. Sometimes it looks like a man silently finishing half a bottle in the garage while pretending everything inside him is manageable. Sometimes it looks like forgotten conversations, missed pickups, unpaid bills shoved into drawers. Sometimes it looks like emotional absence becoming permanent. One Friday night in June, I came home from a part-time shift at a frozen yogurt shop near Southern Avenue around 11:40 p.m. The kitchen light was on. My father sat alone at the table staring at an unopened electric bill. For a second, he looked so exhausted that my anger almost disappeared. Almost. Then he looked at me and said, "Your mother thinks you hate us." Not, "How are you?" Not, "You look tired." Not even, "Thanks for helping with your brother all these years." Just accusation wrapped in self-pity. I remember setting my keys down very carefully before answering. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. "I just don't think you see me." The room went completely still. To this day, I think that may have been the most honest sentence anyone had spoken in our house in years. My father laughed once under his breath. Not amused, uncomfortable. Then he said something I would spend years unlearning. "You're too emotional, Leah. Life gets harder than this." I think emotionally immature adults say things like that because they confuse emotional suppression with strength. But ignoring pain does not erase it. It transfers it, usually onto children. That night should have become a turning point. Instead, it became confirmation. I stopped trying after that. Not academically, not professionally, emotionally. I stopped reaching. And the scary thing? Nobody in my family seemed to notice the difference. Claire moved to Flagstaff that fall for college. Mason buried himself in sports and friends. My parents continued orbiting stress instead of confronting it. And me? I became productive. Extremely productive. Trauma sometimes creates high-functioning people because achievement feels safer than vulnerability. At 16, I worked 2 part-time jobs. At 17, I was helping manage scheduling at the yogurt shop while maintaining near-perfect grades. Teachers loved me. Managers trusted me. Adults constantly described me as wise beyond my years. I think people should be more alarmed when children stop acting like children entirely. One evening in October 2011, Mrs. Feldman asked what I wanted after graduation. I told her I was thinking about culinary school. Her entire face lit up. "You smile differently when you talk about food," she said. That sentence stayed with me because I realized something terrifying. I had become so emotionally contained that people noticed immediately whenever genuine joy escaped accidentally. A few weeks later, she arranged for me to shadow a small bakery owner in downtown Mesa named Luis Ortega. Tiny place. Only 6 tables. The sign outside read, "Ortega Bread and Coffee since 1987. I still remember my first morning there. 4:52 a.m. Dark outside. The entire kitchen warm with yeast and cinnamon. Luis handed me an apron without asking 100 personal questions first. Another thing I appreciated. Traumatized people can sense when curiosity is compassionate and when it's voyeurism. He taught me how to knead dough properly that winter. Not aggressively. Patiently. "Bread tells you when you're forcing it," he said one morning while reshaping a failed batch of brioche. People do too. I think about that sentence constantly now. Because he was right. Force creates resistance. Safety creates transformation. That bakery became the first place in my life where my presence felt calming instead of burdensome. Nobody sighed when I entered rooms. Nobody acted emotionally inconvenienced by me existing nearby. I didn't realize how starved I was for that feeling until I finally experienced it. And somewhere between flour-covered countertops and sunrise prep shifts, I started imagining escape. Real escape. Not fantasy. Not revenge. A future. The problem was, the closer graduation got, the more obvious it became that my family had absolutely no idea who I actually was anymore. Tension inside our house changed once college became real. Not exciting real. Dangerous real. Because higher education costs money. Dreams cost money. Leaving costs money. And by early 2012, we barely had enough money to keep pretending everything was stable. I turned 18 on February 11th. Nobody forgot my birthday, technically. That almost hurt more. My mother bought a grocery store cake with too much blue frosting. Mason gave me a gas station gift card. Claire called from Flagstaff and apologized 3 separate times for not visiting. My father shook my hand. Actually shook my hand. Like I was a coworker leaving a company after 10 years of acceptable performance. I remember staring at him thinking, this man genuinely does not know how to be emotionally close to people anymore. And honestly, I think that realization healed something tiny inside me. Because children naturally assume neglect is their fault. It takes years to understand some adults are emotionally unavailable to almost everyone, including themselves. 2 weeks later, I got accepted into the culinary program at San Diego Coastal Institute. Partial scholarship, not full. I still needed housing money, supply fees, transportation, books. But when I opened the acceptance email at the Mesa Public Library around 3:16 p.m., I cried so hard Mrs. Navarro thought someone had died. In a way, someone had. The version of me that believed escape was impossible. I printed the acceptance letter 3 times because I was terrified the email would somehow disappear before I got home. That night, I placed the envelope carefully on the kitchen table. Nobody reacted the way I imagined. Not anger, not excitement, just stress. My mother immediately asked, "How much is this going to cost?" My father asked, "Isn't there something closer?" And suddenly, the room shifted away from achievement and directly into inconvenience. Again, always inconvenience. I think emotionally neglected children become adults who secretly hope one extraordinary accomplishment will finally force people to love them correctly. But unresolved families rarely change because of one proud moment. They simply absorb your achievement into their existing emotional structure. Claire called later that night and screamed so loudly into the phone, I had to hold it away from my ear. "You're getting out," she kept saying. "Leah, you're actually getting out." That sentence made me realize something uncomfortable. Everyone in the family had understood the emotional reality of our house long before we admitted it out loud. Some of us just survived it differently. Over the next few months, tension between me and my parents became strangely polite. Not warmer, just distant. Like everybody unconsciously understood I was halfway gone already. My father drank quietly, my mother worked longer hours. Mason stayed out later with friends. And me? I worked constantly. Morning shifts at Ortega Bread and Coffee, afternoon classes, night shifts at the yogurt shop. I averaged maybe 4 hours of sleep. But exhaustion felt productive, hopeful even. From my experience, survival feels lighter once suffering starts leading somewhere. Then came April 27th, 2012. The night everything finally broke open. I came home around 11 after closing at the bakery. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. My parents sat at the table surrounded by papers, bills, bank notices, a foreclosure warning. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in 6 months. My father didn't even look up when I walked in. Then he said, "We need to talk about San Diego." Every nerve in my body tightened immediately. I stayed standing. Nobody invited me to sit. My mother folded her hands together and said carefully, "We just don't think it's realistic right now." Realistic. Another adult word children learn to fear. I asked what that meant. My father finally looked at me, and I swear, part of him already knew he was about to permanently damage our relationship. "You need to stay local," he said. "Get a job. Help out for a few years." Help out. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had been helping out since childhood. Emotionally, financially, practically. There are daughters who become additional parents inside struggling homes. Nobody notices because they're praised for being mature instead of protected for being overburdened. I asked quietly, "So Claire got to leave." But I don't. My mother immediately jumped in. "That's different." Every neglected child knows that sentence. That's different. Translation: someone else's needs naturally made more emotional sense to us than yours. I asked why. And finally, the truth slipped out. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. My father rubbed both hands over his face and muttered, "Because you're the one who stays, Leah." Silence. Real silence, the kind that changes the oxygen in a room. I stared at him. "You just assumed I would." Nobody answered, which was answer enough. I think one of the most painful experiences in life is realizing people were never taking care of you emotionally. They were depending on your ability to tolerate neglect quietly. My mother started crying almost immediately after that. She said they were overwhelmed, scared, drowning financially, and part of me understood. That's what complicated everything, because they weren't evil people, just emotionally unequipped ones. People who kept choosing survival shortcuts without understanding those shortcuts were landing on their children. But understanding damage does not erase damage. That's something I believe deeply now. Trauma explained is still trauma experienced. I went to my room that night and packed one suitcase. Not dramatically, methodically, 3 jeans, 4 shirts, work shoes, knife roll from the bakery, the acceptance letter. Then I sat on the floor until sunrise staring at the wall while the entire house slept. And sometime around 5:41 a.m., I made the first fully selfish decision of my life. I chose myself. Not loudly, not angrily, just finally. 3 days later, Luis Ortega drove me to the Greyhound station himself. Mesa to San Diego, 7 hours and 42 minutes. He handed me $40 folded inside a napkin and said, "Don't spend your whole life waiting for emotionally unavailable people to suddenly become who you needed." I think that was the moment adulthood truly began. Not when I turned 18. Not when I left Arizona. The moment I stopped confusing survival with love. Tip noi dung nip kam suk va realism kwakak chapter truk. San Diego did not save me immediately. I think that's important to say. People love stories where escape automatically becomes healing. It doesn't. Sometimes escape is just the first quiet room where you finally hear how damaged you actually are. The apartment I moved into sat above a laundromat on University Avenue. Tiny kitchen. Thin walls. One broken ceiling fan that clicked every 17 seconds, like it was counting down to something. I shared the place with 2 students from City College who mostly kept to themselves. And for the first month, I barely unpacked. Trauma teaches you permanence is dangerous. Part of me still believed every place I lived was temporary. Every kindness conditional. Every stability borrowed. During the day, I attended classes at San Diego Coastal Institute. At night, I worked prep shifts at a restaurant in Hillcrest that smelled permanently like garlic butter and bleach. By the end of most weeks, my feet hurt so badly I sat in the shower because standing felt unreasonable. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something unfamiliar. Relief. No one in that city knew the version of me that had spent years emotionally shrinking herself inside somebody else's house. I wasn't the easy daughter anymore. I was just Leah. And honestly, I had no idea who that was yet. The first person who truly saw how damaged I was happened to be my chef instructor. Marcus Vale, 43 years old, divorced, former restaurant owner from Portland. He had burn scars across one wrist and the emotional energy of someone who had survived at least 3 different lives already. In September 2012, during a pastry lab practical, he stopped beside my station while I was remaking pâte sucrée for the 3rd time. "You measure everything like you're afraid of consequences," he said. I laughed awkwardly because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. From my experience, hyper-independent people often approach mistakes like survival threats instead of normal human events. That realization hit me hard. Because he was right. If I overmixed dough, my chest tightened. If I forgot something small, panic arrived instantly. If someone sounded disappointed, my nervous system reacted like abandonment was minutes away. That is what emotional neglect does long term. It trains children to believe love becomes unstable the second they stop performing correctly. Marcus never treated me delicately after that conversation, which weirdly helped. He corrected me directly, expected excellence, told me when my work lacked confidence, but he never made me feel emotionally unsafe while doing it. There's a difference between criticism and contempt. Children from unstable homes learn that difference faster than most adults. One rainy evening in November, I stayed late practicing laminated dough because I kept ruining the butter layers. Around 9:40 p.m., Marcus finally leaned against the prep table and asked, "Why are you trying so hard to never fail in front of people?" The question irritated me immediately, which usually means someone accidentally touched truth. I told him failure had consequences. He nodded slowly, then said something I wrote down later on a receipt because I didn't want to forget it. Disappointing people is survivable, Leah. Destroying yourself trying not to disappoint them isn't. I think about that sentence almost weekly even now, especially when Team Chum Chung Toy works with young adults who grew up believing usefulness was the only safe form of love. Because eventually, those kids become adults who overwork, overgive, overperform, and still secretly fear abandonment. Around that same time, Claire visited San Diego for the first time, November 18th, 2012. She brought gas station coffee and a blanket because she knew I kept refusing to buy one thick enough for winter. That's the thing about siblings raised inside dysfunction. Sometimes love survives in awkward little practical gestures. We sat on the beach near Ocean Beach Pier eating cheap tacos while wind pushed sand against our shoes. And eventually, she asked the question both of us had avoided for years. Do you think mom and dad ever realized how much pressure they put on you? I stared at the water for a long time before answering. No, I said quietly. I think they normalized needing me too early. Claire looked down immediately after that. Guilty. Not because she caused it. Because children inside unhealthy families often realize too late which sibling absorbed the emotional weight. I believe every dysfunctional family silently assigns roles: the achiever, the difficult child, the caretaker, the invisible one. And once those roles settle in, people stop seeing each other clearly. That winter nearly broke me financially. Tuition increased, my restaurant cut hours, one of my roommates moved out unexpectedly. For about 6 weeks, I survived on eggs, rice, coffee, and whatever pastries failed quality control during class labs. I lost almost 12 pounds without noticing. And still, I didn't call home. Not for money, not for comfort, not for help. Pride was part of it. But honestly, fear was bigger. Because emotionally neglected children often believe needing support automatically creates resentment. So we struggle quietly, publicly functional, privately drowning. In February 2013, my car died on Interstate 8 around 11:17 p.m. after a closing shift. Dead battery, rain, phone at 4%. I sat behind the wheel trying not to cry because exhaustion had lowered every emotional wall I had left. Then my phone rang. It was Claire. To this day, I still don't know why she called at that exact moment. Maybe siblings feel things. Maybe coincidence just looks holy when you're desperate enough. She stayed on the phone with me nearly an hour while I waited for roadside assistance. At one point, she said softly, "You know you don't always have to survive everything alone, right?" And I remember gripping the steering wheel thinking, actually, I don't know that at all. That may have been the first honest thing I ever admitted to myself. Not anger, not loneliness, need, real need, the kind I had spent years training myself not to feel. A few months later, Marcus helped me get a part-time position at a small artisan bakery in North Park. Second shift. Bread production. The owner, Sophia Bennett, believed customers could taste emotional care in food. At the time, I thought that sounded ridiculous. Now, I think she was right. People know when something was made with attention instead of performance. Maybe humans are like that too. Maybe that's why emotionally neglected people ache so deeply when someone finally treats them gently without making them earn it first. And without realizing it yet, that bakery was about to become the place where my entire future quietly began. The first time my mother walked into one of my bakeries, she didn't know I saw her immediately. It was September 2024, 8:12 in the morning. Second morning, North Park location. Soft indie music playing, espresso grinder screaming every 30 seconds, a line almost to the front windows because Saturday mornings in San Diego make people suddenly believe pastries are a spiritual experience. And there she was, standing near the menu boards with both hands wrapped around her purse strap like she was holding herself together manually. Older, smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. For a second, my entire body reacted before my thoughts did. That old childhood panic, the instinctive emotional scan. Is she upset? Is something wrong? Do I need to fix this? Then another feeling arrived quietly behind it. No, I don't anymore. I think healing is sometimes nothing more dramatic than your nervous system finally realizing it is no longer responsible for everybody else's emotions. She spotted me near the kitchen pass-through and froze instantly, and suddenly I wasn't 34 anymore. Part of me was 15 again, standing barefoot in a hallway listening to adults discuss me like a logistical problem, but another part of me, the adult part, stood still. Grounded. That difference mattered. She approached slowly. I almost didn't come, she said. Her voice sounded fragile in a way I had spent years imagining would satisfy me. It didn't. That surprised me, because revenge fantasies are usually built by hurt younger selves. But real adulthood is more complicated than that. Sometimes the people who damaged you eventually become sad human beings instead of villains, and somehow that hurts differently. I invited her to sit, not because everything was healed, because I no longer needed avoidance to feel safe. There's a difference. Outside, people carried coffee down the sidewalk. Inside, trays of cardamom rolls cooled beside the kitchen window. Ordinary life continued around us. I'm grateful for that now. Trauma convinces people their pain should stop the world. Healing teaches you the world keeps moving gently beside it. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then my mother looked around the bakery and whispered, "You built all this yourself." I almost corrected her. Not by myself. Nobody survives alone. Marcus helped shape my discipline. Claire protected pieces of my heart when she could. Sophia taught me leadership. Team. Chungtoy built these stores together, one exhausted morning at a time. I think one of the healthiest things a person can learn is how to stop romanticizing hyper-independence. Humans are supposed to need each other, just not at the cost of themselves. Finally, my mother said the thing I think she had rehearsed 100 times before coming. I don't expect forgiveness. And honestly, that helped more than any dramatic apology could have. Because accountability sounds different than guilt. Guilt cries. Accountability understands. There's a difference. She told me things I had already figured out years earlier. That she was overwhelmed, emotionally immature, exhausted, ashamed. That after I left for San Diego, the silence inside the house changed permanently. Claire barely visited. Mason moved out young. My father drank himself deeper into emotional isolation before eventually getting sober in 2019 after a mild stroke. And underneath all of it sat one truth nobody wanted to say aloud for years. I had been the emotional stabilizer in that family, the child who absorbed tension so everybody else could function more comfortably. From my experience, families rarely notice the emotional labor of the easy child until that child finally leaves. Then suddenly, everyone feels the weight she had been quietly carrying for years. My mother cried eventually, softly, not theatrically, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to comfort her. That was new too. I used to think compassion required self-abandonment. Now I think healthy love requires boundaries strong enough to protect both people from repeating old damage. She asked if I hated her, and strangely, I realized I didn't. Hate requires ongoing emotional attachment. What I felt was sadness, distance, compassion sometimes, but mostly acceptance. I accepted that my parents had loved me with the emotional tools they had, and those tools were insufficient. That truth can coexist with pain. Before she left, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out something folded carefully in half. A faded paper. Crayon. Me at maybe 7 years old, standing beside our old Arizona house, holding the hand of a woman with yellow hair that was apparently supposed to be her. At the top, in uneven handwriting, I had written, "My mom always makes our house feel safe." I stared at that sentence for so long, my vision blurred. Because children do that. We build entire emotional worlds out of small moments adults barely remember giving us. One kind breakfast. One bedtime story. One afternoon, somebody looked fully present, and we survive inside those memories far longer than anyone realizes. "I kept it all these years," she whispered. I nodded slowly, then finally said the thing I think both of us needed most. "You hurt me deeply, but I don't think you were trying to destroy me." She broke down crying after that. Real crying. Not defensive crying. The kind that arrives when a person fully understands the distance between intention and impact. And honestly, I think that was the closest thing to healing our family was ever going to get. Not reunion. Not perfect repair. Truth. Just truth. After she left, I stood alone near the espresso machine while morning light stretched across the floor tiles. One of our newer employees, a 19-year-old former foster kid named Ava, walked over carrying a tray of morning buns. "You okay?" she asked gently. I looked around the bakery then, at the staff laughing near the ovens, at customers talking over coffee, at the long wooden tables. Team Chungtoy spent months designing to feel welcoming instead of exclusive. And suddenly I understood something that took me decades to learn. Home is not always the place that raised you. Sometimes home is the place you build after surviving it. These days, Second Morning funds transitional housing support for young adults aging out of unstable homes across Southern California. Not because I think pain automatically makes people noble. It doesn't. Pain can make people cruel, closed off, fearful. But I believe healed people have a responsibility to become the kind of adult they once needed desperately. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not revenge, not reconciliation, responsibility. The little girl inside me still exists. She probably always will. The child who learned too early how to read silence. The teenager who thought usefulness was the price of love. The young woman who mistook exhaustion for worth. But now? She lives differently. She rests. She eats warm bread without guilt. She asks for help sometimes. She no longer apologizes for taking up emotional space. Most importantly, she no longer waits by windows hoping emotionally unavailable people will finally choose her. Because I think real healing begins the moment you realize this. Your value was never supposed to depend on who failed to recognize it.